DDT is not lethal to humans in the doses we have encountered, but it has various environmental impacts, especially to birds, and it can also cause cancer. But this is because of the phenomenon known as biomagnification. The idea behind biomagnification is that as you go up the levels of the food pyramid, toxicity is exponentially increasing. This is because any amount of poison cannot be processed into the environment from the animals. A good example of this can be explained using increasingly bigger fish. If one fish eats 0.02 parts per million of mercury from a sea plant, but eats multiple sea plants, the fish now contains 0.04 parts per million of mercury. Similarly, if a bigger fish comes along and eats two of the smaller fish because that's the diet it needs to survive, the big fish now contains 0.08 parts per million of mercury. In the same way, spraying of DDT has compounded the amount of DDT into levels that are lethal for top predators.
With the majority of the population's ignorance in regards to DDT, it is essential for us to raise awareness of DDT's negative after effects. To understand these, however, it is necessary to understand DDT's history. DDT, or dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, is a synthetic chemical which was widely sprayed from the 1930s to the 1970s, and it virtually eradicated malaria in the United States. Its use is now heavily regulated as a result of Karen Carson's book Silent Spring, because the toxins contained in DDT are deadly due to the process of biomagnification, where 1 or 2 drops of the chemical ingested at the first trophic level kill consumers at the secondary and tertiary trophic levels due to the sheer quantity of primary consumers digested. Our advocacy is necessary because DDT's use is still allowed when safe according to the FDA, despite the fact that DDT cycles through agricultural runoff as well as groundwater to affect a region larger than intended. DDT not only adversely affects ecosystems, but the chemical's effect will wear off on mosquito populations over time. The use of DDT really doesn't have any positives.
Okay, so I want you to imagine that you live in a small town in Michigan of about 7,000 people. Within your town, you and your neighbors have noticed the appearance of dead birds pretty much all over the place. Even though you complain and complain, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality has done pretty much nothing to address this issue. Unfortunately, this likely has to do with the fact that a majority of the people living in your town have a very low annual income. As sad as it is to admit this, it is likely that government response would have been stronger and more immediate if your community was more well off. Anyhow, it just so happens that in your town there is an old chemical plant. This chemical plant used to produce DDT and similar pesticides, but the plant had to be shut down because, well, DDT has been outlawed in the US for over 40 years. If it's been over 40 years, it seems unlikely that DDT could be responsible for the death of these birds, but unfortunately, it is. So, the way it works is that DDT from the old chemical plant contaminates the soil around the old plant, and worms living in this area consume small amounts of DDT that aren't enough to kill the worms, but do result in the death of larger predators such as birds because of biomagnification. So what are the negative impacts of biomagnification on the bird population? Well, the accumulation of DDT causes brain lesions and liver abnormalities in the birds. It also causes a thinning of eggshells. So as the birds try to reproduce and create a new, stronger generation, they're vulnerable to the fact that the eggshells that they produce are not always strong enough to protect their chicks. Furthermore, scientists estimate that a concentration of 30 parts per million of DDT is enough to kill birds. And when scientists investigate the corpses of birds in your small Michigan town, they find that the average dead bird, has a concentration of 552 parts per million of DDT in its brain. So DDT works by breaking down into a different compound called DDE, and this DDE accumulates in the bird's brains, and with a high enough concentration, it results in the bird's death.
Mosquitoes are malaria vectors which can be controlled by DDT. This explains why there is use of DDT to control malaria in outbreak-prone areas. The WHO says that we should first use mosquito nets, which are very effective. The whole of the impacted population uses them. In addition, we should use an IRS like DDT. DDT was outlawed by the Stockholm Conference in agricultural use, but it's still legal to use it to protect yourself against the disease vectors until you can replace it with another IRS. The WHO does not recommend DDT, but if there is no other protective agent around, you can use it to keep yourself safe as long as you abide by WHO guidelines.